what's going to take place now, and I'm just calling this out. Remember, economically, they don't have anything, those on the left. So what foreign policy-wise, there's not a lot of victory because nobody is buying what they're trying to sell in the case of Iran or Syria, and the treatment of Israel and threatening boycotts, and if they don't get in line, in essence. And yes, I'm jumping ahead and I'm taking actions over words. That said, from our government, that said, they don't have a lot of winners. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to go to a debate where you have good people on both sides of the debate. There are good people who desire a pathway to citizenship or reform. I call it amnesty because that's the end result. And there are good people who oppose this. I am one of the people that opposes amnesty big time. But Chuck Todd presents the argument to say, why is it that we have the Republicans not forwarding this and enthusiastically moving forward with this because they claim government will not enforce the law, specifically this administration? Roll it.
The argument to slow walk legislation because the president can't be trusted to implement it, though, strains credibility. If you can't trust the president, then why pass any laws? Why pass a farm bill? Why hammer out that budget deal? President Obama will only be in office another 2+ years. Most of the legislation on immigration doesn't even take effect until after he's gone. But we know what this is really about. It's a strategy we've seen before from the Republicans to downplay the divisions in their own conference. They want to seize on the one thing that unites them: opposition to President Obama. Boehner's reluctance to push ahead on immigration is a long-term disaster for the GOP. If the House refuses to pass immigration after the Senate did so last year, it will become clear to the public, particularly viewers of Telemundo and Univision. They cover the story much more closely than English language television. But it'll be clear that one party is standing in the way of reform, and it's the Republican Party.
Okay. Reform always sounds good, doesn't it? Why not just enforce our laws? Why don't we have years of that? Why don't we take into consideration history in 86 and what happened after 86 with all the same promises being made and broken? Why don't we take into account that the president changed the law through his own DREAM Act and non-enforcement when a year previous he said specifically that it was not in his powers, in Article 2 powers. It was the Article 1 powers vested in Congress to do this, and he explained it and then did exactly what he said he could not do. We don't have answers. We've talked about the sense of the IRS and the freedom of religion. I mean, I almost want to go down that road. It's a turnoff, but it ends up in the same place, which is lack of trust and lack of accountability and the defense of failed programs. And in a way, attempting to make this, okay, you don't like Hispanics, Crane, or there's something racial that you don't like about this. No, I like the rule of law. I think it is our foundation. When you tweak it, it has a ripple effect, and we've seen that. We've seen that in the Chrysler deal with the bondholders, the treatment of them. We've seen that with a government that will target a particular business or industry. Their industries become risk adverse. There is you can't have these things happen in a vacuum. They impact each and every one of us, and they impact the psyche of a nation. That said, we have the reasons that are being given. We will not benefit, quote unquote, in the sense of politically, if you're looking at this through Republican and Democratic lenses. We look at it economically, we cannot afford it. It expands the welfare state. And like many of these things through history, we've seen these things get locked in, and like a government program, they don't go away. It's just the camel's nose under the tent for the overall policy, much like we see in the healthcare legislation that will lead to single payer, as we've talked about for years. And it's happening. Take the profit out of insurance, make them rely on the government, boom. Done. Checkmate. It doesn't take someone at genius level to figure this stuff out. This is pretty clear, and it's the way power works, and it's the understanding of government. And It's the appreciation of, hey, the last part of things, there are exceptions, the last part of things is passing the legislation. You can't get the American people on board for this. Why is that? Because your arguments do not hold up. You can talk about constituencies from unions to the Chamber of Commerce. But when it comes to the American people, as Americans without hyphens, you can't sell it because they know better. They see what they see with their eyes. They see what they see with their lives. And so with that, we have Andrea Mitchell asking former Secretary of State Colin Powell about the Republican Party and his support related to amnesty and his frustration with the likes of Boehner for slow walking. Roll it.
The Speaker said, not now. It seems to be a lot of resistance to even having some sort of compromise on immigration. You know, at a time when our workforce desperately needs to keep some of these highly educated foreign students in particular.
If not now, when? If not now, when? We keep putting it off. The beginning of the President Bush's administration, I was the Secretary of State, we were moving on this, and then 9/11 threw it off track. But sufficient time has passed so that we should all understand by now that we are an immigrant nation. We are fueled with every new wave of immigrant who comes to this country. People wonder, are we still the great country that we pretend to be or present ourselves to be? And the answer is yes. They're lined up at all of our embassies and consular offices saying, I want to go to America. 800,000 students from other countries are in America. And whenever they get the skills that can be useful in America when they graduate with a PhD in computer science, give them a green card. The DREAM Act should be a no-brainer. And so I think we really have to buckle down and do something about immigration reform and do it as quickly as we can. And this has been a siren song of mine for many years.
It has. But again, we go to enforcement, the ability for our borders to be protected, the ability for us to build a fence and get it done. Wonderful article from our good friend Bruce Thornton, who could not be with us tonight. He'll be back next week, on amnesty and the supporters from the Republican Party who are pushing this. He says they're out on a bender, in essence. Again, costs, rule of law, the history of this. I can go back to 65, Immigration Act of 65, and what it did with the language and the promises that were made then. We're not going to break the 40% barrier. And even if we do, if we're sacrificing what, and I'm speaking to conservatives here, not Republicans, not always the same thing, but the Republican Party people who are making this argument say it would benefit politically, but you undermine your foundation by benefiting politically, and then you've won, but what have you won? Because you haven't really won your agenda, have you? And what you've done is you've allowed to be, you talk about being, playing on somebody else's field and allowing for that to get set and accepted. I mean, I find it tremendously insulting, especially with the comments that we've had from leaders of, liberal leaders, to accuse conservatives of being racist. Again, it's real easy, though. It's like anything else, like class war, it's real easy. We can all start getting into that because it plays into a very simple narrative that once the accusation's made, you've got to prove you're not. And in proving you're not, we've got ways in this country that are really bizarre, because if you believe that diversity as a factor of qualification instead of merit, if diversity trumps merit, wow, that's a huge problem. Also, it empowers government and corruption within government to go and identify us not as Americans, but as colors, as ethnicities, as genders even, as we've seen, to break that down. And the gender one is not going away, as frustrating as it is, and how it could be exposed for the fact that it's just it's not true, but it's not going away. It'll be on steroids with Hillary Clinton. Because what else would one run on? Her record, Benghazi, general record, economically, her husband's record. What did her husband do to get the economy going? He adopted conservative platforms and was dragged kicking and screaming to do so. There are also other aspects to that whole discussion. That said, just something to keep in mind of what works and what doesn't work. But this is what really gets me with Colin Powell. He always has to, it seems that he invokes this. He says he's a Republican. Ostensibly, that would be more conservative, yet he supported President Obama twice on policies that would be direct contradictions to what he claims his platform that he supports is. That said, he made the reference to Andrea Mitchell, to the dark vein of intolerance within the Republican Party. Elements of it. Roll it.
I will repeat that now. There are certain elements within the party which go out of their way to demonize people who don't look like the way they'd like them to look like, or who came from some other place. And I think the party has to deal with this. And the party says we're doing it. They came out of last year's election with a lot of ideas about how they were going to make themselves a little more acceptable. And yet you see things happening. You see members of the party in senior levels making statements about women, making statements about minorities that once again make the party look less tolerant than it should be. When you see a party that seems to, in some states, go out of their way to sort of restrict voting on the pretense that there is a lot of fraud going on. And I want to see a party, either Democrat or Republican Party, that is working to get everybody to vote. Isn't that what America's all about?
I do too, and part of that would be to stop lying about people and their policies who support accountability when voting, as to make sure the voting is legal, and that's truly fair. There's many ways I could go with Colin Powell. Armitage being the leak and the Stuart Liberty. Remember that? Yeah, he was the leak and allowed that to be there for a better part of a year. And in essence, I thought that was not really helping the country or the president that he served to be accused of lying when he knew better and he knew who was actually revealed the information. But again, I digress. I'll keep the focus on the dark vein of intolerance that he speaks to and elements of a particular party. Well, let's get specific. Am I racist for supporting voter ID? Because I've got to tell you, like you, the thought of somebody who is truly racist makes me angry. It frustrates me. I don't want any part of them. I don't want to be around them. There's a visceral response. The fact that we have this visceral response to people who would bully somebody because of their homosexual behavior. Same thing. Nobody supports that. They look at that bully as somebody is awful. But that doesn't mean I don't believe homosexuality is a sin. I don't believe that. It doesn't mean that I don't support a marriage between a man and a woman, and I recognize plumbing and gender, and the beautiful institution of God's design. Doesn't mean I hate the person who's the sinner either. You see, you can get by with making these statements if somebody who is interviewing you doesn't challenge you. Colin Powell, please come on my program. We'll have a nice conversation. It will be respectful, but I got a lot of stuff to go over. That said, it's been a wonderful week. I appreciate each and every one of you. Please do me a favor. Go to the Facebook page. Chime in on the headline of the week. Live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart, and always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. God created you. He loves you. You're worth it. Have a great weekend. AFR Talk.